All right, Morgan here with Winter Warfare, where it's not enough to take the initiative, you must exploit the enemy. And in today's topic, we will be talking about fighting outnumbered and winning. And to do that, I'm going to use two key items, two other discussion points, and I'm going to pull those together. Those two other items will be JFC Fuller's 3 domains of war, or 3 dimensions of war, which are cognitive, moral, and physical. We'll also be looking at a couple of the elements of maneuver warfare and maneuver warfare theory, pulling those things together to give you a little bit better understanding of some very important topics surrounding warfare and fighting outnumbered and winning. So today's conversation could be for professional soldiers, could be for citizen soldiers, could be for your militia guys out there. And let me give you a little background about myself. I'm former infantry. I did my time doing that. I'm former airborne. I did my time doing that. But primarily, and right now, I have a degree in economics. And so I've spent the vast majority of my life as an analyst. And I see a lot of the things that are occurring around the world, which makes the conversation that we're going to have today extremely relevant, and the reason why I want to bring this up. And as we get ready to talk about the 3 domains of war, which again, as I mentioned, are the cognitive or mental, the moral, and physical, we're mainly going to we will exclusively focus on the moral domain. And so as we get started with that, I want to bring up a book. My background, I'm Welsh, I'm a Celt, and maybe that resonates with some of you. But what I would say is some of the things we will be talking about today are not only American, they might be Americanesque, they might also be European, but the point would be is you need to find something that's important to you, something that matters, because what I'm going to propose to you today is that there's more meaningful, more in-depth things for you to think about that will be important to you, possibly in the future. So as we get started, I want to bring up a book. This book is 1,000 years old. It's the Mabinogion. It's a Welsh book. And in this book is a story of Prince Pal. There's numerous stories in here, and it's one of the first books that was ever written. And in the book, Prince Pal is, he's out riding, he's out on a hunting trip one day. And one common theme in some of the old stories was the other world. And you have to imagine a time where there was no TV, there was no entertainment. Basically, there was these stories that were told. And these stories were told 1,000 years ago before it was ever a book. As I mentioned, it was one of the first books ever written. So as the story goes, Prince Pal is out hunting, and his hunting dogs run into another set of hunting dogs, and he finds out that he's in this other world, and he runs into King Aaron from the other world. And King Aaron proposes to him that he has this foe, King Halfdan, that's trying to hurt his kingdom, if you will. He proposes to Prince Pal that they trade places for the year. They trade places. Nobody will know. They're gonna Prince Pal will look like King Aaron. King Aaron will look like Prince Pal. Nobody will know. And at the end of 1 year, Prince Pal will fight this enemy of King Aaron, and everything's going to be good again. So they trade places for a year. And what it says in the book is that at night, Prince Pal was with King Aaron's wife every night for a year. They traded places. Nobody knew that they traded places. It was a secret. And at night, what the book says is instead of carousing, instead of having fun, Prince Pal turned his back on the queen for a year. He could have taken advantage of that. He could have exploited that. And honor is a very big reoccurring theme. And so what happens is after a year, they trade places back, and King Aaron is talking to the queen, his wife, and the queen asks King Aaron, well, all year, why didn't you kiss me? And it dawned on King Aaron of just how valuable of a friend that Prince Pal was. And because of that, they became best friends. And the moral of the story is about honor. It's about our ancestors, and it's about the modern world that we live in, and historical revisionists that like to paint a picture of how things used to be, and it's always been like it is today, when that's just simply not the case. And this book, The Mabinogion, is a case and testament to that. So there's a couple other things that are extremely, I think, valuable to me. Maybe they're valuable to you. And as I mentioned, as we talk about a couple of these, you need to think about some things that resonate with you. So right behind me, in 1805, Lewis and Clark touched this ground. I can't say enough about that, of how remarkable that was. And I'm right here. This is my home. This is a place that I love. And a little bit after 1805, maybe even more significantly to me, out in the Oregon Territory, which I'm in the Western Rockies right here. This was, at one time, the Oregon Territory. My great-great-great-grandfather touched the ground. Came out on the Oregon Trail in 1854. So maybe for you, you know about Sam Houston. Maybe you're in Texas. Maybe you're in the South, and you know about Davy Crockett. Maybe you're in California and you know about Kit Carson. Maybe you're in Germany and you know about Arminius. Maybe you're in Finland and you know about the Winter War. Again, some things of fighting outnumbered and winning. Different reasons to bring some of these things up. So let's get into the three domains of war, and as we get done with that topic, we will move into some of the elements of maneuver warfare. JFC Fuller was a British officer, and I believe this was around the time of World War I. And basically what they started to do was, you can imagine the trench warfare and things just stalemated, and they really started to fine-tune the way the war doctrine was written and what we know now. And yes, it's changed some over time, but these are still things that many military officers to this day still argue about. PhDs argue about maneuver warfare and some of the things that JFC Fuller had brought up, but it's just something to propose and to think about. So the three domains of war are basically your cognitive, which is your purpose and logic. It is your moral, which is your instinct, and it is your physical. And what I would point out about these three things as we talk about them, 2/3 of the three domains of war are not actually physical, okay? They're mental or cognitive and moral. So let me tell you a couple things about the moral domain of war and why that's so important. And again, let's tie that with fighting outnumbered and winning, and why I'm focusing just on this one aspect. In the world that we live in, it's very easy. Most people only look at the physical aspect of war. They're only looking at how many tanks were blown up, how many dead bodies there are. However, as I mentioned, 2/3 of war, if you look at these three domains, is non-physical. It's the planning, and then it's basically what's going on in your mind. So let's talk about the moral aspect of war and why that's important. And what I proposed earlier was, no matter what your job is, maybe you're a professional soldier, maybe you're a citizen soldier, maybe you're in the militia. I'm proposing that, again, with some of the stories that I brought up that are at least important to me, that there's more important and more meaningful reasons and things to think about, things to die for, I guess you could say. And that's what the moral aspect of war is. And so to reiterate a couple other pivotal people throughout history that have talked about the moral domain of war. Clausewitz said that the moral domain of war is the spirit of war. Napoleon said that the moral domain of war is 3 times that of the physical. And so there's a lot of things that go on in our head in war. I mean, basically, this discussion is we're dissecting war because you have to understand in war, one goal is to defeat. If you look at Sun Tzu, one thing to think about is defeating the enemy before the war even starts. And so you see in our modern society the cultural war, the non-physical, the moral war, the attack on society, if you will, and how that's demoralizing. Because in a minute we'll talk about maneuver warfare. And in maneuver warfare, a lot of the concept surrounds possibly even winning, before shots are fired. There is some element of that in maneuver warfare. So the moral domain of war includes things like will. It includes things like self-sacrifice. It includes things like why you would die, things you would die for. Protecting a pregnant woman, for example. So you can see that the moral domain, what's going on in your head of, why you're going to fight this battle, it could be so important. And again, as I mentioned, in just a minute, we'll talk about a couple of the elements of maneuver warfare. And when you look at fighting outnumbered and winning, you need some good reasons. I think that if your reasons are simply shifting sand, the modern way, which is doors that lead to nowhere, shifting sand, if your thought process, if your values are limited, you're limiting yourself in war. There's some very important things to fight for, I guess you could say. So again, when you look at the 3 domains of war, the cognitive, moral, and physical, again, only 2/3 of those are the action, which is the physical part. And an important thing to think about as we get ready, I'm going to talk about some of the elements of maneuver warfare in a minute. And again, the topic of discussion is fighting outnumbered and winning. And so if you don't have some valuable reasons, more than the shifting sand days that we live in of logic, some things of value, you could have a hard time. And so let's talk about Colonel Walter E. Kurtz, if you've watched Apocalypse Now. And I'm going to explain why maneuver warfare is important. Because when we talk about the moral part, a lot of what maneuver warfare is looking at doing is just morally crushing the enemy to defeat. And an interesting thing, if you watch Apocalypse Now, Colonel Kurtz said, like a snail crawling on a straight razor. And I want you to think about what he meant by that. And I think what he meant by that is no matter what that snail did on the straight razor, it died. Okay, if the snail stayed there, it died. If the snail moved forward on the straight razor, it died. And that's a large part of what you want to try to do in warfare, is morally defeat the enemy. And again, another reason why you should have some good moral reasons why to fight, because a large part of warfare is morally crushing the enemy, creating impossible dilemmas for them where they have no option. If they retreat, they die. If they move forward, they die. Has it been done in history? Yes. Again, you could look at Arminius in Germany. You could look at a lot of other cases. In 1066, the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the Vikings actually fought Harold Godwinson, the Anglo-Saxons, and the Vikings actually lost that war. that battle, I guess you could call it. But on that bridge, or on that bridge was a berserker, and he held Godwinson's army enough. And so if you have significant reasons, is going to be very important, so that you're not in an impossible dilemma, that your enemy is going to want to create an impossible dilemma for you. And that's another thing to talk about probably really quickly. Is another big part of warfare is outthinking, outsmarting your enemy. It's knowing what they're going to do. Another big part of maneuver warfare is simply outthinking the enemy. You know, hitting them where they're not going to know what hit them. That's going to be a surprise to them. It's surrounding the enemy, giving them no option. So there's a couple things to think about in regards to maneuver warfare. Let's say you're outnumbered. What kind of options do you have? And this is stuff that you need to think about. These aren't exclusive. There's a lot to think about. There's probably a lot that I'm going to miss, but you know, a raid, okay, an ambush. You know, is your 6 guys going to go up head to head with you know, a tier 1 force? I doubt it. So you need to be looking at these maneuver type techniques, these other forms of war that are also very important. I'm not saying there's not a battle to be waged, but there's smarter ways to do it. So when we also talk about maneuver warfare, it includes things like turning maneuvers, envelopments, basically where you're just coming around the enemy, penetrations, infiltrations, and things like this. All things that could be used to your advantage. So, for example, a turning maneuver. Well, actually, let me back up a step. Let me just put it to you this way. One thing that the United States Army's Mission Command has taught us is the importance in a very quickly and rapidly changing situations. Again, this part might only apply to soldiers that work in a giant bureaucracy. What the Mission Command doctrine tried to do, or is doing, is disseminating, or I guess putting more power down at a lower level, if you will. And why could that be important? Well, the reason why that would be important is because in an ever-changing landscape, the environment can change around you very quickly before you even have time to run something up the chain of command, 3 levels, to the battalion, to the brigade, to ask what you should do. So that mission command structure is putting more at the lower echelon, if you will. So I want you to think about an example of a turning maneuver, for example. Being in a position of strength is relative, and one thing that you should know is that I could be on a hilltop, okay? I could have the high ground, if you will. I could be dominating the high ground, but then the world environment could actually change around me. And if the world environment changes around me, now I became irrelevant because I wasn't able to adapt and change and to meet the enemy's level that they're at. So an example might be the Maginot Line in France, for example. You know, the Maginot Line was, you know, a multi-million-dollar defensive mechanism, and you know, all the enemy did, if you will, was just go around it. They just didn't go head to head with that, and that's the maneuver warfare logic, is looking at those things where you're not necessarily fighting head to head. I'm not saying that's not always the case, but it can be part of this. And as I mentioned too, there could be many things that I'm leaving out. These are just some things to consider. So with that, let's look at a couple maneuver warfare topics to look at on a small terrain model that I've made up. And this is just some more ammunition for you to think about, because let's just say you and your squad of guys are out in the woods and you come across the bad guy. You know, what are you and your six to nine guys going to do? You need to look at warfare like a game of chess. Okay, so we'll look at the terrain model and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Okay, so now let's look at our hasty terrain model, and what I have here is my 6 good guys and 6 bad guys. And this is kind of amateur hour conversation at this point, but there's a lot of, let's just say, prepared citizens. There's a lot of militia guys that need to understand these concepts. There's just a lot of guys out there that want to be more prepared, and this part of the conversation will be for you. So what I want you to really think about is, let's just say, yeah, you're walking through the city, you're walking out in the woods, and this is you. Your 6 guys come up on 6 bad guys. What are you gonna do? What I'm trying to point out to you is that the opposite of maneuver warfare would be attrition warfare. And attrition warfare simply works like this. My 6 guys are gonna shoot your 6 guys. The 6 bad guys are gonna shoot at me. I lose a guy, they lose a guy. That's attrition warfare. What maneuver warfare looks at is flanking elements, it looks at turning maneuvers, it looks at other things to do to engage the enemy. Now, one component of that is, when we talk about this discussion, it's called fire and maneuver. Fire and maneuver, they work together. You can't have fire without maneuver. You can't have maneuver without fire. But I'm just trying to have you walk through in your mind, like, what are you going to do? It's like a chess game. And what you need to realize is that in this chess game, if it's just attrition warfare, you can't defeat the enemy. You're not giving them an improbable situation where if they turn around, they die. If they move forward, they die. The maneuver warfare theory basically looks at, surrounding the enemy. So let's just say it's just like a game of chess. This is the king, okay? There's the king piece, and that king is not going to be taken out unless you have the queen surrounding it. You have the bishop surrounding it. You have the knights, the pawns. Because what happens if it's just attrition warfare and your 6 guys are just lined up with their 6 guys, they could retreat, you could retreat. And so one obvious thing that everybody knows about is the Overwatch. And so this is how an Overwatch looks. Basically, you have your fire team, and your fire team is fixing the enemy. You have to fix them. You have to make them think, like, these guys, these are the bad guys. They need to know that you're engaging them. And while you do that, you have a second element flank around. While you're doing that, you have a second element flank around, and these guys are going to come through. As this team comes through, these guys are going to lift their fire. So another thing is an envelopment or turning maneuver, and these can be like just one-dimensional, two-dimensional, three-dimensional. The thing is how could you, a smaller force, outsmart the bigger guys, or maybe your equal foe? Well, the turning maneuver is basically you have your fixing element, and you have another element come back even further. And they sweep around to the back. Maybe in the back is a fuel depot. And the whole purpose of that is to demoralize the enemy. The whole purpose of surrounding the enemy is to demoralize them. It's to give them an impossible dilemma. It's to give them no option. If they're surrounded, if they move forward, they die. They move back, they die. That's crushing the moral aspect of the battle. So there's many other ways to do this. You can create fake ambushes. You can lead them in and draw back, creating a horseshoe. And when you draw back, they're going to draw in. There's a tendency to try to fix to each other. It's kind of like magnets attaching to each other. But when you pull back, that can be an option. All right, well, that's the end of the discussion. Hopefully it gave you some things to think about as far as the moral ammunition of reasons and some of the maneuver elements, some things that you and your team need to think about as far as, real things that could happen to you. And maneuvering around them, defeating the enemy in other ways, fighting outnumbered and win. And so as I end this discussion, the last thing that I'll say is be dangerous, but be in control. And that's all I got. Morgan out.